I'm Elisa Parker. We're broadcasting from the Wild and Scenic Film Festival here in downtown Nevada City in Grass Valley, California, right here in the Sierras. But over this weekend, thousands of social change makers and other filmmakers come together in this convergence. We talk about solutions and hope, some of our most dire situations that we're encountering on our planet right now. And our next guest has looked at a new perspective, a way of viewing this, and how not only how we can be aware of what's going on our planet, but also the importance of listening. I'm excited to have Bernie Krause back with us here to Wild and Scenic, and also his wife Kat, and Masha, the filmmaker, here with us. So welcome back.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's good to have you here. So you talk about in the film is it soundscape?
It's called Soundscape Ecology.
At some point, I'm going to get it, Bernie, in my head. Soundscape ecology.
Remember this.
Yeah.
It's the study of sounds that come from natural habitats, whether they're marine or terrestrial.
I love that. And you have, by the way, the largest archives of sounds, and you've worked on all kinds of films, like Apocalypse Now, but you took a shift in your life way back when to capture the sounds of the wild, of nature.
Yeah, and specifically whole habitats, because before, when I started out, the model that was used in the field was you go out with this huge parabolic dish and you try to separate each of the animals out of context and record them one at a time. And so I started off with that model, but I was hearing, because my background is in music, I was hearing things more collectively, like all of the sounds together. And I began to record from that perspective and created a library and the beginning of a new subject, soundscape ecology, based on recording whole habitats, both marine and terrestrial, to hear how all the sounds work together.
Right, and one of the things that is showcased in the film, The Last of the Nightingales, is how the impact that we've had on our environment. Obviously, we know this has an impact on the wildlife and such, the plant life. But what's interesting is through sound and listening, you can specifically point out how the depletion, for example, of wildlife. Just even, we were talking, Masha, about selective foresting.
Selective logging.
Selective logging. So tell us a little bit about that and what you discovered through doing, capturing the collective soundscape.
Well, if you think of the soundscape as an orchestra, an animal orchestra, when a habitat is healthy, it sounds that way in that orchestral voice. It's the same thing with us. When we're sick, our voice sounds funny.
Right.
Same thing with the natural world. The biophony, what I call the biophony, or the collective sound that comes from all of these animals in a habitat. When the collective sound is rich and it seems not stressed, it conveys something to us. It's a narrative of place. It's a narrative of time. You can always tell from listening to a habitat how we're doing in relationship to that habitat.
Right, and so you have examples of and time lapses.
Sure.
Tell
before
us,
and after.
So here's a healthy forest and the orchestra of the wildlife.
Yeah.
Abundance.
Yes.
And then there's selective logging, and then what happens?
Well,
what do you hear?
Well, first of all, we hear a lot of things. We hear from the logging company that there's going to be no environmental impact from selective logging, taking out a tree here and there, leaving the rest of the forest standing. But when you record that, when you record the forest before they do that, and then you record it after they do that, you hear the way that the habitat has been impacted by our endeavor, what we're trying to do. The forest looks exactly like it did before we started.
Right.
But listen to it and hear the difference.
You can literally hear the difference, and it's featured in the film, The Last of the Nightingales. And I think what you're doing is revolutionary. It really is. And Masha, I'm assuming that's what you were thinking when you came on and said, I need to tell this story.
Absolutely. When I first heard Bernie speak on the radio, KPFA Love Radio.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how our planet is sort of descending into silence and how we're losing the voice of the planet, the natural biophonies. It struck immediately. I don't think I've ever heard anybody talk about it this way. And it was just such an important story, the voice of the planet. We had to tell it. And we had to talk about what's, exactly what Bernie said, how the voice is expressed. And so much you can tell from that. Mm-hmm.
There's a fellow who wrote a book called The Others, How Animals Make Us Human, a fellow by the name of Paul Shepard. And in it he says the further we draw away from the natural world, the more as a culture, the more pathological we become. And if you don't believe that, watch the news.
Right. Well, and even during the pandemic, when we were in lockdown, it was so interesting. I was talking to John Bauermeister, who's going to be one of our guests coming up, and he's traveled all over the world and covering stories on wildlife and such. He's like, I just looked in my backyard during the pandemic to see what was going on there. I think there was an element that it enabled us, for a lot of us, to get more connected on what's around in our area in the natural world, which was what seemed like a benefit to know what the birds are doing. And
well, we really can't disconnect.
We can't. We are connected. Didn't we learn? We're like, it's part of our lives as human beings.
That's right.
So you had a really tragic experience. Here we are in California, so wildfires are prevalent here, and you lost your home. And Kat, can you tell us a little bit about that? And are you still on that? Are you still on that land?
No.
Oh, no.
You're not. Okay.
No, that land, even after 5 years, that land is completely devastated. It's sort of looks like a Halloween card up there. But the interesting thing about it was that we have spent a life trying to connect to the natural world, and certainly know about wildfires. Certainly have been, seen them, been through the western wildfires before. This was unlike anything I've ever seen or that we've ever experienced. And even knowing that, we were totally unprepared. At 2 o'clock in the morning, everything around us was completely engulfed in flame, and we had to run for our lives. And so I guess the takeaway from that is just that with global warming and with drought and with risk of natural disaster or disaster caused by our effect on the habitats, no one is prepared, and that it can happen to anyone. And that was a real lesson, and it really connected me with the diaspora and the people that are now climate migrants and what's happening, because it made me feel as though we are all climate migrants.
We are all
right
climate migrants, and I'm so sorry that you lost your home. And I know, of course, here in Nevada City, we've had our own experience with fires. And so, all of a sudden you have a real realization, like we are deeply connected, whether it's droughts, fires, you can see it, you can experience it. Bernie, what are you listening to now? And how is the work that you've been doing? We talk a lot about solutions here, both in the films and at Wild Scenic. So, what are you listening to, and what is that leading to?
Well, first of all, I'm 84 years old, so I'm able to move around less and less.
Yeah.
I'm recording at a place about 20-minute drive from where we live, a place called Sugarloaf Ridge State Park. And it's a wonderful place to record because it's relatively quiet. There aren't a lot of things happening early in the morning, very early in the morning. No people there, certainly. And so that's the time that I go to record in the spring. And what we found is it's an expression of what's going on in our habitat in general. Like, for instance, the California drought, which started really around 2011 in a serious way. And by 2015, we had a silent spring in Sugarloaf Ridge State Park. All of the animals were quiet. There were many around, but they just weren't. They just weren't vocalizing. But things have come back a little bit now. And in 2022, we had it told another part of that epic dialogue that is expressed through the natural soundscape. and it sounded pretty healthy in 2022. 2023, we're going to go back in a couple of months to record again, and see what that habitat is like.
You know, how does this associate with us as human beings and the sounds we're making?
Well, we're overwhelming one of the things, we have huge egos.
Right.
And so we want to make our presence known, and it doesn't make any difference how we do that, through, deception or disinformation or loud noise, or, whatever it happens to be. So that's overwhelming the fragile sounds of the natural world. And one of the things that was really remarkable to Kat and me is when, just after 9/11 and 9/12, the day after 9/11, everything was quiet. There was no traffic, there was no airplanes, and we were sitting out in the back in September, and we heard the soundscape, the natural soundscape in our backyard that we had never heard before. And we just hoped that there would be some way to maybe have a national holiday of quiet.
Right. Even when we were locked down, I remember there were no cars on the freeway, because
Sure.
I could see that, and I'm like, oh, listen to all, you can hear the hawks.
No, you're
The
talking
songbirds.
You're talking about solutions.
Yeah.
So if we made
Love that.
A national holiday and impressed on people the importance of recognizing quiet in our lives, perhaps it would begin to change the culture in a way that would embrace that.
Right. I love that, Bernie. And Masha, what's next for you? And what do you want to say about all this as we wrap it up?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Bernie and Kat, for teaching me how to listen.
We
Really?
thank you. Yeah. This is your fault, Masha.
Yes.
It's such a beautiful film.
Yes, but this is part of a series of 6, and the series of 6 is about the places, the people, the habitats we can no longer save, no matter what we do. So soundscapes that are falling silent. A couple of the next films that we're doing is in the Russian Arctic, for example, the lone resident of Wrangel Island, who kind of takes care of this collective. Where all the polar bears give birth. It's the island where like 60% of all the polar bears on Earth give birth. And how quickly that's disappearing. So it's a very striking example. Or the Tuvalu, the 6th smallest nation on Earth, where the sea level rise. They will become the first nation to hold the dubious honor of being an entire nation of environmental refugees, right? So what can we learn from that? What can we learn from a silent soundscape? What can we learn from people who are literally disappearing in front of our eyes? Yeah, it's a little love letter. It's a document. And
Well,
we
thank
wanna
you
move
for
forward
everything
with
you're
that.
doing around it.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful film, The Last of the Nightingales. And Bernie and Kat, thank you so much for returning and for
Thank
what
you so
you're
much.
doing.
We
And
thank you.
revolutionary. And Masha, great to have you here. So it's so important that we take that moment to listen. I love the idea that we're going to have a day of silence, and we'll see what happens with that. So much is possible. Everything's possible, and we're experiencing it here this weekend at Wild and Scenic Film Fest. I'm Elisa Parker. It's great to have you with us, and we'll be back in just a bit. That was awesome. Wonderful. Yeah, no, I was like, oh my gosh, it's